Keanu had walked into that studio with a quiet heaviness he didn't try to hide. His shoulders were lower than usual, his eyes a bit distant, as if he had left part of his spirit somewhere else before arriving. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a silent fatigue, the kind that comes from too many long days and too many private thoughts. Assistants moved around him, sound engineers checked microphones, cameras adjusted angles, but he didn't engage. He just sat, nodded, and waited. He was respectful, calm, polite, but not present. Even the small jokes from production didn't bring the usual warm reaction. Keanu listened, gave a faint smile, then looked back down. He looked like a man who needed a moment that nobody could give him. That changed the second Sandra walked through the door. She didn't rush in with noise or fanfare. She just appeared, a quiet presence, holding a cup of coffee in one hand, her hair tied loosely, eyes searching the room before landing on him. She noticed his silence immediately. She didn't call out his name or force big energy. She just let her face soften, the corners of her mouth lifting in that familiar, gentle smile she had given him years ago during long press tour and difficult shooting days. Keanu looked up slowly, like he wasn't sure he deserved warmth right now. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a memory, a small acknowledgement that even strong spirits get tired. That smile wasn't for cameras, not for fans, not for headlines. It was something she gave him because she cared. And for the first time in that entire room, Keanu actually breathed. His shoulders lifted, his eyes moved with more focus, and a quiet emotional pause settled around him. No jokes, no dramatic reactions, just stillness. The kind of silence that means something. People in that room noticed. A few crew members exchanged looks, confused but curious. Why did her smile do that to him? Why did the energy shift like someone opened a window? Sandra didn't push further. She just sat in the chair beside him, close enough for comfort, far enough to respect whatever he was carrying. But that smile stayed. She held it like a small offering, waiting for him to come back to himself. And Keanu, he lowered his gaze, swallowed, and tried to steady his breathing, because sometimes kindness is harder to receive than distance. That soft moment wasn't finished. Something else was coming, something deeper that neither of them had spoken out loud. Keanu didn't speak right away. Silence was easier, safer. He had lived most of his life inside pockets of quiet, airports, hotel rooms, movie sets, interviews, stages, places where a man could be seen by millions but still retreat into his own mind. Fame never protected him from loneliness, and success never taught him how to explain the weight he carried. Sandra knew that silence well. She had seen versions of it before, back on Speed, then again on the lake house, and in those private moments between takes when actors stop pretending and become human again. Some people misread silence as moodiness, but she always read it as vulnerability dressed in patience. She shifted slightly in her chair, leaning back, holding her coffee with both hands. She didn't interrupt him, didn't ask if he was okay, because both of them hated questions that forced emotional explanations. Instead, she let the moment breathe. Keanu watched that, noticed the stillness she offered, and slowly lifted his chin like a man preparing to step into something uncomfortable. "Long morning," she finally said, her voice low, warm, not dramatic. He exhaled through his nose, barely a laugh, barely a sigh, but enough to show he appreciated the gentle invitation. "Long year," he replied. She nodded, no surprise, no pity, just acceptance, the kind of acceptance only someone who has survived their own storms can offer. She took a sip of coffee and let the words settle between them. Keanu's eyes drifted to the floor again, and his fingers tapped against his knee like they were searching for rhythm, control, or courage. People around them pretended to stay busy. A makeup artist pretended to reorganize brushes. A camera operator stared at the lighting panel a little too long. Everyone sensed that something personal was happening, and nobody wanted to break it. "You don't owe this room anything today," Sandra said quietly, keeping her eyes forward. "Just show up the way you can." Keanu swallowed. That sentence hit him deeper than she intended. He had built a career out of carrying more than he should, more pressure, more expectations, more responsibility to be calm and gracious even when life cut through him. He thought about the losses he never fully processed, friends gone too early, family ripped from his timeline, heartbreak that never healed properly. Grief didn't ask permission. It arrived and lived quietly in his chest, and he learned to continue anyway. Today was one of those days when continuation felt harder. "Sometimes I wonder," he said softly, "if the world forgets that we're people before we're anything else." Sandra's eyes didn't move. The world forgets because it's easier. People forget because they want stories, not souls. He glanced at her, surprised by her bluntness. But that was the thing about Sandra. She always cut through noise with grounded honesty. She never tried to be extraordinary, she just showed up as herself, and the world loved her for it. Keanu rubbed his thumb across his palm, a nervous habit he picked up years ago. What if I'm tired of being a story? She smiled again, not the first soft smile, but a new one edged with understanding. Then stop performing for a minute. Be tired, be human. No one in this room deserves more than that. Keanu heard the word human, and it felt heavier than anything else. So much of his existence had been reduced to fragments, memes, interview clips, rumors, speculation, pieces of a person without context. Sandra's voice gave him context again. It reminded him that before studios and scripts, there were friends who looked at him without expecting magic. He shifted, sat taller, and actually looked at her fully, taking in her calm posture, the small lines near her eyes that came from years of real life, laughter, and surviving the unpredictable nature of the industry. She wasn't a memory from his past. She was proof that some connections never fade, even when careers twist in different directions. I missed this, he admitted. She raised an eyebrow. The coffee, or the part where someone treats you like a person? He chuckled quietly, small but sincere. Both. She leaned a little closer, elbows on her knees now. You know, when you walked in, it felt like you were holding your breath. You don't need to do that here. Her words were soft, but they slipped right under his defenses. Keanu wasn't someone who cried easily, not in public. His emotional life was private property. But hearing someone recognize his breathing, that was intimate. He hadn't realized how tense his chest was until she said it. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just let emotion tighten his throat. Sandra didn't look away. She didn't flinch at vulnerability. I think I'm just tired of the wait, he finally said. Tired of pretending I'm unaffected by everything. She nodded slowly, eyes lowering as if she was searching her own memories. I know that wait. I know the pretending too. He studied her profile, the small tension in her jaw, the way she held her breath for a second. She wasn't offering sympathy, she was offering identification. She understood. And that was the difference. People can comfort you, but only a few can understand you without asking questions. Someone in the back called out, "We're shooting in 5," trying to move things along. The spell broke slightly, but not fully. Keanu inhaled slowly and exhaled through parted lips, grounding himself in the present moment. He turned his head, watching the stage crew adjust lighting. He saw the audience section being prepared. He saw cameras facing chairs they would soon occupy. Performance was coming. Expectation was coming. The world was coming. But then he looked back at Sandra. She placed her coffee down carefully, folded her hands together, and gave him a steady look. Listen, we can walk out there and give them energy we don't have, or we can walk out there and be honest. Honesty survives longer. He admired her courage, that stubborn authenticity she never abandoned. She wasn't asking him to hide his heaviness. She was asking him to accept it without shame. What if honesty makes people uncomfortable? He asked. She shrugged. Good, discomfort wakes people up. And that was the line that settled everything for him. Discomfort wakes people up. Not performance, not forced enthusiasm, not faked optimism. Honesty. He nodded slowly, like someone signing an agreement with himself. The heaviness didn't disappear, but it became manageable, something he could carry with dignity instead of shame. Sandra stood first, smoothing her shirt, rolling her shoulders like a boxer loosening up. Keanu watched, fascinated by how she prepared herself, not as a celebrity, but as a human trying to face another room of strangers. She reached out her hand, not dramatically, not seeking attention, just an offer. A simple gesture between two old friends. Keanu stared at the hand longer than he should have. Accepting help required humility. Accepting care required courage. He wasn't always great at either. But slowly, he reached out. And the moment his fingers touched hers, someone behind the cameras whispered under their breath, almost involuntarily. Did you see that? Because even a touch can reveal 1,000 unspoken truths. The stage lights weren't gentle. They never were. They were designed to erase shadows, to expose faces, to make emotions readable for strangers sitting at home. Keanu stepped into that brightness first, still holding onto a quiet breath, still aware of the lingering weight in his chest. Sandra walked just behind him, close enough that he could feel her presence at his back, steady, patient, unhurried. There was a small audience waiting, studio guests invited to watch the interview. They clapped when Keanu appeared, louder when they saw Sandra. To them, it was entertainment. Two beloved actors reunited. A little nostalgia, a little excitement, a little gossip. But none of them could see the emotional tremor hidden under Keanu's polite smile. He didn't bow, didn't wave exaggeratedly. He just nodded once, hands slipping into his pockets as he walked to his chair. Sandra sat beside him, crossing her legs and smoothing the fabric of her pants like this wasn't live television, like she was just settling into a living room conversation. The host tried to warm up the room. Well, 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 look who we have here, America's favorite duo. The audience reacted. Whistles, cheers, Keanu forced a faint smile. Sandra gave a soft laugh, but she didn't lean into theatrics. She could tell he didn't have the bandwidth for playful exaggeration. She waited, letting him speak first. The host continued, 20 years later and people still talk about your chemistry. Chemistry, reputation, expectation. Words that belong to public narratives, not real human experience. Keanu shifted slightly, adjusting his position, grounding himself with one slow inhale. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. He could feel the camera framing his face. He could feel emotion crawling up the back of his throat, the awareness that millions might decode his expression. Still, he tried. That's kind of everyone to say, he replied, voice calm, steady. We were just trying to do our jobs. The audience chuckled, because humility always sounded charming coming from him. But Sandra noticed the way his fingers pressed into his thigh, subtle pressure to maintain control. The host turned playful. Come on, Keanu, don't be modest. She brought out a different side of you. Sandra shot a slow look toward Keanu, curious how he would navigate that. He met her eyes briefly, a silent question, a request for help. She saw it. She responded. I think he brought out a human side of himself, she said, her tone smooth, steady. People confuse chemistry with honesty. Keanu never fakes his emotions, that's why audiences respond. The room quieted. The comment wasn't flashy, it was introspective, unexpectedly deep. The host blinked, caught off guard, searching for another upbeat hook. But the crowd seemed engaged now, leaning in, sensing depth. Keanu looked at her, startled by her phrasing. Honesty, faking emotions. She was talking to the room, but speaking for him. And it helped. He nodded, shoulders loosening, his voice a little clearer. I try not to pretend. Life's too short for performances. For a second, nobody moved. Then an older woman in the second row murmured, That's true, loud enough that others heard it. People chuckled, nodding. The host finally pivoted. Well, the internet has been losing its mind about both of you being in the same room again. How does it feel being reunited? Keanu could have said something generic, it's fun, it's great, we're excited. But exhaustion stripped away polite templates. Instead, he spoke from a raw place. It feels familiar, he said. Safe, I guess. Sandra turned slowly toward him. That word, safe, said everything. She didn't need to smile, she didn't need to touch his hand again, she just breathed in steady. That's mutual, she replied. And then something subtle happened, a shift of energy like air thickening in the room. The host registered it, the audience sensed it, and cameras zoomed in closer. They weren't watching movie stars anymore, they were watching two people navigate something unspoken. The host tried light humor again. Safe, Sandra, what are you doing to make Keanu feel safe? Feeding him snacks backstage? Emotional therapy. Sandra's eyes sharpened just a bit. She didn't like jokes that turn vulnerability into spectacle. Maybe I'm just not rushing him, she answered simply. People bloom when they're not pushed. The audience responded with soft applause, not excitement applause, but agreement applause. Thoughtful, supportive. Keanu felt his chest loosen, not completely, but enough. Enough to speak without fear of cracking. She's always been patient, he said quietly, even when I wasn't good at receiving it. There it was honesty, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just a quiet confession on live television. Sandra's expression softened, not with pity but respect. She knew how personal that sentence was. She knew how much cost sits inside a single admission. The host leaned forward now, curious. Receiving patience, what does that mean for you, Keanu? He didn't break eye contact with Sandra, because she felt like the only safe listener in that moment. It means sometimes silence is the only language I have, he said. And not everyone knows what to do with silence. The audience fell into attentive stillness, that rare space where people forget they're watching a show. Sandra didn't jump in, didn't rescue him. She let him finish. But she does, he added. Sandra breathed out slowly, a breath full of emotion. Admiration, gratitude, concern. She didn't need to perform a reaction. Her eyes carried enough truth. Before the host could turn it into a headline moment, Sandra redirected, protecting him. Keanu is someone who listens deeply. People think silence means distance, but it often means respect. The audience nodded again, a collective hum of understanding. The host leaned back, letting the emotional tone settle. But another question hovered in the room. Someone was bound to ask it. The host took the risk. Keanu, earlier backstage, were you okay? You seemed quieter than usual. Sandra's jaw clenched, slightly protective instinct. She didn't like anyone poking at emotional wounds. But Keanu answered calmly, not defensive, not irritated. I was processing, he said. Life, work, things I haven't really spoken about. The host hesitated, unsure how far to go. And did seeing Sandra help that? Keanu didn't rush the response. He let silence work for him, a deliberate pause. Yes, he finally said, more than she knows. Sandra's eyes flickered, a small crack in her composure. She swallowed once, turning her face slightly away like she needed a second to regroup emotionally. His honesty landed somewhere personal. The audience absorbed the moment like a living organism, one collective breath. Keanu continued, voice lower. Sometimes one familiar smile reminds you that you're not lost. The studio remained silent. Nobody laughed, nobody clapped, nobody interrupted. Because everyone understood what it means to be lost, and what it means to be found unexpectedly. Sandra blinked away the shine in her eyes and said softly, and sometimes one silent man reminds you that gentleness still exists. Keanu looked down, because tenderness was harder to carry than pain. And that was when the emotional cliff arrived, quiet but devastating. The host whispered, "What are you two holding back?" Keanu didn't answer. Sandra didn't answer. But their silence told the truth. There was a story shared, unfinished, unspoken, and the world wasn't ready for it yet. The interview wrapped with polite applause, but the energy wasn't the usual post-show excitement. There was curiosity in the air, like everyone sensed a deeper current running under the surface. But curiosity didn't concern Keanu. He felt drained. Not physically, emotionally. Speaking honestly on camera was like ripping a seam that had been stitched closed for too long. As soon as they stepped off stage, production swarmed them with gratitude, directions, questions about photos, social mentions, clip distribution. Assistants moved in with headsets, scheduling managers appeared with tablets, makeup retouches were offered. Everything became noise again. Keanu stood still in the middle of it, calmer than before, but not entirely steady. Sandra sensed it before anyone else. She stepped between him and the rushing movement, placing her hand gently on his forearm. It wasn't dramatic, just a boundary. Give him 30 seconds, she told the crew, voice firm enough to earn compliance. People froze, hesitated, then pulled back a little, giving Keanu a pocket of space. He inhaled slowly, like someone learning how to breathe again. Sandra didn't hover. She didn't rub his back or offer emotional slogans. She just stood beside him, grounding the air around them. After a moment, he looked at her and whispered, "Thank you." She shrugged lightly. For what space? You're allowed to have that. But it wasn't just space. It was dignity, and Keanu valued dignity more than anything. They moved toward the backstage hallway, leaving the noise behind. Sandra carried her coffee again, though it had gone cold. Keanu pushed his hands into his pockets, walking slowly, slower than necessary. The hallway was quiet, lined with black curtains, dim light, and distant echoes from the studio. You handled that well, Sandra said. Keanu shook his head. I don't know if I did. I think I said too much. She smirked. You said the truth. That's never too much. He paused mid-step. The truth makes people speculate. Let them, she replied. Speculation is cheaper than honesty. They continued walking until they reached a small private lounge, 2 couches, a mini fridge, soft lighting, and a door that shut firmly. Sandra walked in first, kicked her heels off with a sigh, and sat cross-legged on one couch. Keanu sat across from her, elbows on his knees. 4 walls, no audience, no cameras. Silence, but the safe kind. She studied him with patient eyes. So, long year, she prompted mildly. He rubbed the back of his neck, leaning forward. I haven't really slowed down. Films, press, expectations, always moving, never stopping long enough to understand why I'm tired. Sandra nodded slowly. Motion is a distraction, stillness is a mirror. And I've been avoiding the mirror, he admitted. Most of us do, she said. Mirrors tell the truth, and truth demands change. Keanu looked up, gaze steady. Have you changed? She exhaled, shoulders dropping. I've lost things, I've gained things, I've broken, I've healed. I think change is just grief teaching us how to continue. He swallowed, that phrasing cut him open. Grief teaching us how to continue. Nobody summarized his emotional life that accurately. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I'm okay with solitude, but lately it feels heavier, like I'm isolating, not resting. Sandra tilted her head. Keanu, isolation is what happens when pain stops asking for help. He blinked because she spoke to the wound, not the behavior. You think I'm asking for help, he murmured. I think you're asking for human presence, she said. Not advice, not solutions, just presence. He shut his eyes briefly. Presence, the thing he pretended not to miss. After a long pause, he asked quietly, Did you notice when I walked in today? Of course I did, she answered, almost offended at the doubt. You walked in like someone bracing for impact, shoulders high, breathing shallow. And you saw it right away. I've always seen you, she said, even before you knew how to see yourself. That line shook him. He sat still, absorbing it as if it were a sentence written specifically to dismantle self-defense. But Sandra wasn't finished. You don't hide well, she added softly. You endure well, but you don't hide well. Keanu let out a breath that sounded almost like a release of years. Maybe I don't want to hide anymore. Good, she replied. Then stop editing your pain. He opened his eyes, confused. Editing. She nodded. You soften your emotions for other people's comfort. You shrink your grief so the room doesn't tense up. You smile so people can keep pretending you're invincible. That's editing. He stared at her, stunned by how precise she was. And what if I stop? He asked. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, voice steady. Then people learn how to sit with the real you. A quiet ache formed in his chest, relief mixed with fear. Does that scare you? He whispered. She shook her head. It prepares me. He swallowed again, emotion rising like a tide he couldn't control. She saw his jaw tense, saw him blink a little too slowly. She let him fight it. A moment passed before she asked, When was the last time you felt supported? He stayed silent for a long time. The answer was a memory, distant, fragile, painful. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I never let anyone close enough. That wasn't self-pity, it was realization. Sandra absorbed it carefully, her expression turning reflective, almost sad. You don't have to be unreachable to be respected, she said. You can be held and still be strong. Keanu met her eyes. Why do you care so much? She didn't hesitate. Because kindness isn't something you earn, it's something you're given. And you deserve a place in this world where you don't have to apologize for being human. No audience, no script, no spotlight. Just truth. Keanu leaned back slowly, arms crossing, not defensive, just overwhelmed. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize safety. When we were younger, she continued, you always carried yourself like you were protecting everyone from your heart. I used to think it was mystery, now I know it was fear. He didn't argue. Fear was accurate. Fear of attachment, fear of loss, fear that every person he cared for could vanish. Maybe I'm afraid of needing anyone, he said slowly. Sandra smiled, but not lightly. Only people who have lost deeply fear need, but connection isn't weakness, it's recovery. He breathed through it. Every sentence she offered demanded honesty, not performance. The room felt heavier now, but in a healing way. Keanu stared at the carpet and whispered, What if I don't know how to start? Sandra leaned back, voice gentle. Start by not running. Their eyes locked and something shifted. Not romance, not nostalgia. Recognition. She stood up first, slipping her shoes back on. Come on, she said quietly. He raised a brow. Where? Somewhere without cameras, she replied. Somewhere you can breathe. Keanu hesitated, old habits wanting to retreat. But she waited, patient and unwavering. After a long silence, he nodded once and stood. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is follow someone toward the air he's been afraid to breathe. They left the building through a side exit reserved for talent. No fans lined up there, no paparazzi waiting behind barricades. Just a narrow concrete alley, a few delivery trucks, and the sharp, honest air of late afternoon. Sandra wrapped her arms loosely around herself as they walked, not for warmth, but as a way to reset. Keanu kept his hands in his pockets, his footsteps slower than hers. He wasn't stalling. He was adjusting to a world without scripted energy. She led him toward a quiet street where her driver waited inside a black SUV, engine running but windows rolled up. Instead of opening the door, Sandra stopped on the sidewalk and looked at Keanu directly, as if asking one more time whether he really wanted presence instead of isolation. "Fresh air helping?" she asked. Keanu inhaled, eyes closing briefly, shoulders settling. "It's less performative out here." "Good," she said softly. "You never needed a stage today." He stared at her more openly than he had all afternoon. "I didn't expect to feel this exposed." "You're not exposed," she corrected. "You're honest, there's a difference." He processed the distinction. Honest still sounded dangerous, but a different kind of danger, the liberating kind. She gestured toward a small cafe across the street. Simple wooden chairs, wide windows, old acoustic music drifting through the speakers. No dramatic spotlight, no curated crowd. A place where people were allowed to simply exist. "Coffee?" she asked. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "You want more coffee?" She smirked. "I want quiet. Coffee is the excuse." He gave a small nod and they crossed. Inside, a barista looked up, surprised but not frantic. Maybe he recognized them, maybe he didn't. Either way, he treated them like regular customers, took their order, didn't gush, didn't invade space. Sandra thanked him with a warm smile and carried both cups to a table near the window. Keanu sat opposite, fingers curled around the warm cup even though he barely drank from it. For a moment they didn't talk. They just listened to muffled conversations, silverware against plates, the hum of casual life happening without pressure. Keanu let his gaze follow people outside the window, two teenagers laughing over nothing, an old man sitting alone with a crossword puzzle, a mother tying her daughter's shoelace. Simple life. He missed simple life. Sandra blew gently across the top of her drink. "You know, for someone who lives in silence, you still look like you're fighting some internal argument." Keanu huffed a small, reluctant laugh. "I'm debating whether honesty is smart." "Honesty isn't strategy," she replied. "It's relief." He fell quiet again. She let him. Finally, he said, "I'm tired of holding myself together like a museum exhibit." Sandra nodded slowly. "That's because you were never meant to be an object." He tilted his head slightly. "I don't think people know how to see me any other way." "Then teach them," she said simply. He met her eyes. "Who teaches them how to see you?" She smiled, not proudly, not sadly, just truthfully. "I stopped asking permission. I show who I am and let people deal with whatever that means." Keanu studied her posture, her calm tone, the certainty in her voice. She looked like someone who had fallen apart enough times to rebuild deliberately. "You sound fearless," he murmured. She shook her head. "No one is fearless. Some of us just don't apologize for our bruises anymore." That sentence landed, heavy, liberating, painful. Keanu lowered his eyes, his voice dimmed. "I never learned how to show mine." "That's because you were busy surviving," she said. He froze inside those words. Surviving. Not living, not thriving. Surviving. "Sometimes surviving looks like disappearing," he whispered. Sandra leaned forward, her voice low. "And sometimes disappearing is grief in disguise." A beat passed, then she asked gently, "What have you been grieving, Keanu?" His eyes flickered, not panic but defense, like someone protecting a locked room. He thought of friends who became memories, family who became ghosts, relationships that slipped through fingers, versions of himself he had buried quietly. "Too many things at once," he replied. She nodded, no shock, no pressure. "And you handled all of it alone." "Mostly." "Why?" He stared at her, surprised she even needed to ask. "Because if people get too close, they get hurt, or they leave, or they're taken." Sandra didn't break that eye contact. She didn't soften the truth either. and isolating yourself keeps them alive. He swallowed. Her precision hurt because it was accurate. Maybe it keeps me from expecting anything. She let the silence sit between them, but her presence didn't back away. She spoke slower now. Keanu, life doesn't stop taking. That's reality. But if you deny yourself connection because you fear loss, then loss has already won. The cafe noise faded behind those words. Keanu leaned back, eyes unfocused, like his brain was processing each layer of meaning. He whispered, "You make it sound simple." "Simple isn't easy," she said. "Simple just means true." And then she said something he didn't expect. "Keanu, you deserve softness." His lips parted slightly, his breath caught. Softness. The word felt foreign, like a language he used to speak but forgot. "I don't know how to hold softness," he admitted. "Start by not pushing it away," she replied. He glanced down. Her hand rested casually near his on the table, not touching, just existing. An option, not a demand. He didn't reach for it. He didn't move away either. And that was progress. She sat back and exhaled. You know, people romanticize you as this enigmatic gentleman, silent, polite, composed, but they never ask what it costs to keep that image intact. He looked at her sharply. "And what does it cost?" She held his gaze. Loneliness, emotional fatigue, and a heart that never gets to be held. He absorbed it like someone swallowing medicine they needed but feared. "And you," he asked quietly, "what did it cost you?" Sandra looked down at her cup, thumb tracing the lid. She spoke with controlled honesty. "It cost me trusting people. It cost me believing that support wasn't temporary. It cost me parts of myself I had to rebuild." She looked up again. "But rebuilding taught me something. Vulnerability is not a debt, it's a bridge." Keanu breathed out, long, shaky. "And what if the bridge collapses?" Sandra smiled gently. "Then you rebuild again, stronger, uglier, wiser." He stared at her, eyes softer, voice barely above a whisper. "Were you always this resilient?" Her laugh was soft but real. Number resilience is just pain wearing armor. A silence stretched, full of respect, full of recognition. Finally, Keanu spoke. "You really think I can stop editing my pain?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." He blinked. "How?" She leaned forward. "Because your silence isn't emptiness. It's language. People just never learned how to read it." Those words cracked something inside him, something tight and guarded. And then quietly, intentionally, he said, "Stay." Sandra didn't pretend she misunderstood. "I'm here," she answered. "Not forever, not with promises. But here, now, present. For a man learning how to breathe again." They stayed in that cafe until the sunlight shifted from bright afternoon to the softer gold of early evening. Neither counted the time, neither asked if they should leave. Presence had become an anchor, quiet, steady, unforced. Keanu wasn't smiling widely or cracking jokes, he was just present. That alone felt like emotional progress. He finished the last sip of coffee he never really tasted and set the cup aside. Sandra watched him, sensing a shift, not dramatic but meaningful. He sat taller. His breathing was calmer, his hands no longer fidgeted against his knee. "Something change?" she asked gently. He looked out the window again, people moving, life happening. "I stopped fighting myself for a minute." She nodded. "That's all you needed today." He hesitated, then said, "I didn't know how heavy I felt until you helped me put some of it down." Sandra didn't blush or turn emotional. She just held his gaze with the same calm certainty she'd offered him all day. "You put it down because you were ready," she replied. "I just made space." He almost smiled, not because he felt cheerful, but because he finally understood gratitude without guilt. After a while, they stood to leave. Sandra slid her purse over her shoulder. Keanu adjusted the collar of his jacket. Before stepping outside, he paused. "I'm not sure what happens after this," he said. She shrugged softly. "Nothing has to happen. Conversations don't require consequences." That line steadied him again. Not every moment needed to become a movie scene. Sometimes two humans could share honesty and walk away intact. Outside, the temperature had dipped. Wind brushed past them, reminding both that time kept moving. Sandra took a slow breath. "You look lighter," she said. He chuckled faintly. "You've said that 3 times." Because it keeps being true, she countered. They crossed the street back toward her car. The driver stepped out to open the back door. Sandra turned toward Keanu and asked the only question that mattered. Are you going home, or are you disappearing again? He froze, not in fear but recognition. She saw through patterns he hadn't acknowledged. I'm not disappearing, he said slowly. I think I've done enough disappearing for one lifetime. Her smile was quiet but proud. Then go home, rest as a human, not as a public figure. He exhaled, a release disguised as breath. And what about you? She shrugged. I'll go home too. Bruised humans need sleep. He stared at her for a moment longer, awed at how easily she turned pain into clarity. Thank you, he said again, softer this time. She didn't downplay it, she didn't joke. She accepted the gratitude. You're welcome. She stepped toward the car, but before ducking inside, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Keanu. He lifted his chin. Yeah. Her voice lowered, not dramatic, just sincere. Don't wait another decade to let someone see you. His breath caught. That sentence felt like a key, one that opened a locked emotional room. I won't, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and got into the car. Keanu watched as the door shut and the engine rolled forward. She didn't wave dramatically from the window. She didn't make a production out of leaving. She trusted that the moment didn't need theatrics. He stood on the sidewalk long after the SUV disappeared. The city noise grew louder around him, but it no longer overwhelmed him. He reached into his pocket for his phone, not for distraction, but for intention. He opened a text thread he hadn't touched in months. Someone he had distanced himself from, not out of anger, but habit. He typed slowly, Hey, want to grab dinner this week? It wasn't profound, it wasn't dramatic. It was connection. He sent it before fear could edit it. Then he slipped the phone away, not waiting for a reply. This was the first bridge. That night, Keanu returned to his apartment. He turned on a single lamp, not the overhead lights. Soft lighting felt kinder. He hung his jacket, kicked off his boots, and sat on the edge of his couch. The silence in his apartment didn't threaten him like before. Tonight, silence felt like a friend, not a verdict. He leaned back against the cushions, eyes half closed, and replayed the day, not the interview, not the audience reaction, just Sandra's smile. The first one. The soft one. The one that didn't ask anything, didn't demand anything, didn't evaluate anything. A smile that said, You're safe, you're seen, you're allowed to breathe. He whispered into the empty room, I forgot how much a small gesture can matter. He didn't cry, he didn't unravel into dramatic pain. He just existed with emotional humidity in his chest, something tender, something human. He fell asleep without forcing it. The next morning brought sunlight through his window, not harsh, gentle. He sat up slowly, muscles relaxed. He felt something unusual, rested, grounded, like emotional adrenaline had burned out and left clarity behind. His phone buzzed. A reply. Dinner would be great. I missed hearing from you. Keanu stared at the message, surprised by how simple connection could be. Fear had made him expect rejection. Reality offered warmth. He exhaled through a smile, not perfect, not beaming, just real. He stood, stretched, and moved into his kitchen, making coffee in silence. This time, silence didn't isolate him, it supported him. Mid-sip, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Sandra. Just 3 words. You breathed proud. He stared at the screen, emotion pressing gently against him. He typed back. Thanks for the air. She left it on read. Not because she ignored him, because she trusted the moment enough not to manage it. That afternoon, Keanu walked outside, not hiding behind sunglasses, not tucking his chin into his chest. He walked like someone who remembered the world wasn't hunting him. A few people recognized him. One waved timidly. He waved back, not a performance, just a gesture. He passed a young man sitting alone on a bench, head down, shoulders tight, energy heavy with unspoken struggle. Keanu slowed, feeling an echo of yesterday. He didn't intrude. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply paused and said, You okay, man? The young man looked up, surprised anyone noticed. He nodded slowly, not really okay, but comforted by acknowledgement. Keanu gave him a soft nod, the same kind of nod Sandra gave him. A nod that meant I see the weight and I'm not afraid of it. Then he walked on. That night, somewhere across the city, Sandra sat on her couch, knees pulled up, hair tied back, face washed clean of makeup. She held her phone loosely, not typing, not scrolling, just reflecting. She wasn't thinking of ratings or public reaction. She was thinking of a man who walked into a studio with invisible armor and walked out with a slightly open heart. There was no dramatic reunion promised, no secret romance, no public statement, just two adults who survived different forms of life and recognized each other's fragility. And maybe aging wasn't about staying untouchable. Maybe it was about softening without apology. Maybe connection wasn't about grand gestures. It was about holding a moment long enough to let someone exhale. Keanu poured himself a glass of water later that evening and stood by his window. The city lights flickered. Cars moved in slow streams. Life continued. He ran a thumb along the rim of the glass, not anxious, just thoughtful. He whispered, not to anyone, but to the version of himself that spent years surviving. I'm still here. Not broken, not erased, still here. And somewhere across the city, someone who understood his silence was here too. Not holding him up. Not fixing him. Just existing in parallel. Sometimes that's enough.